Wow, well, listening to all of the morning's incredible essays and papers and encounters in language with Robert's work, I realized that, and I realized this, of course, getting into this, which is that to look at the amazing amount of work that Robert has done, and then to be able to write about it is kind of needing to take on a sort of jellyfish thing in your mind, where you're able to sort of grasp at everything that's there and pull it in and sort of have something to say. And I have to tell you that over the past few weeks, that has not been my state of mind. It's been much more, I guess you'd say, akin to a lot of little tadpoles in a rather unattractive pond. But so in order to come up here, but before you, and certainly before Robert, I realized that I needed to design some kind of a thought experiment that would pull me into this state that I wanted to be in. And so from 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Just on Thursday, I read this incredible book, one of my all-time treasures of Robert's, The Garden of Distances, which was a collaboration that he did with the Italian artist Brigitte Malchecht. Is that even close? I then put the book aside and repeated to myself 3 times before falling to sleep, I will follow this book into dream, and in the morning the dream will direct my writing about Robert Kelly. It was a fairly sleepless night, thanks to all the external nudging and wobbling of the bed's other occupants, my partner Richard and my beagle Aster. But at 4 a.m. I woke up and I was very upset because I had not had this dream that I wanted to have. But thankfully, I did fall back asleep, awoke rather refreshed at 7, and indeed the dream that would lead me to eventually be able to write this talk did happen. And I'm actually not going to spend any time telling you what this dream was about. I did submit it Friday afternoon, however, to the Annandale Dream Gazette, which is a project maintained by Lynn Behrendt, who's right here in our audience, and so perhaps you'd be willing to also talk to people about that project. It's a great project inspired by one of Robert Kelly's many what-ifs, this one being, what if a dream is, above all, exactly as language is, social? This is the aspect of the dream that is seldom considered, dream as arising from the speaking back into a community of native dreamers, so to say. So I'm taking for this that the idea is that dream consciousness is not solely directed into the mind of the dreamer and therefore reflective of our own internal state, but it is in some way seeking an audience among a larger community of dreamers, old, human, new consciousness, because thoughts are meant to transmit. The Garden of Distances begins, as many of Kelly's long poems do, with a thread that is followed with little to no conscious intervention of Robert's will. The poem triangulates the process that Malchecht is following in her drawings, which Kelly describes as, and you can just sort of try and imagine this, if it looks like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a geodetic service topo map, then you're seeing it right. You see streets and houses and avenues and people and some giants and some fat figures. And often these and I believe this book is out there and available for you to peruse. Often the topographical maps show parallel landscapes, worlds that are aerially suspended in vast burrowing underground passageways. And in the book, the poem memories, dream fragments, emotional uprisings, unidentified surfacings are mapped into Kelly's language as it follows, diverts, and tracks the drawings. And this is a brief poem, sort of fragment from the midst of this beautiful work. To follow every single line, everywhere, to go all the way till they purify the distances into their absolute apart. Their absolute apart. I'd like to fly with that line for a moment, so bear with me. This reminds me of a wonderful moment in my practice, which is that there's a famous story about the hypnotherapist, the father of hypnotherapy, Milton Erickson, who happened to be working with the famous novelist Aldous Huxley. They were in sessions together, and Huxley requested that Erickson perform deep hypnosis with him in order that more complex phenomena be induced to permit him, Huxley, to explore himself more adequately as a person. And without getting too into it, Erickson did regress Huxley into a deep hypnotic state using what he calls famously the confusion technique, which is defined as disassociating a person from a selected recent area of his life experiences so that he can view it as an onlooker from the orientation of another relatively recent life experience. Elizabeth Robinson, in citing Fannie Howe, brought up the word bewilderment, which is another way of saying that. In that deep hypnotic state, Erickson repeated to Huxley a certain line to get him into that place where he would be able to have that perspective. And the line was, the depth was apart and apart. The depth was apart, and apart, one word. So apart, two words, apart, one word. The depth was apart and apart. This is a purposely vague suggestion that relied on Huxley's intelligence and subconscious intuition to apply to his own meaning and go where he needed to go in his mind in order to achieve the perspective he was seeking. And we could all think about that sentence and do the same thing, go wherever it would take you in your mind. But if I think about it in relation to Robert's Poetics, the depth was apart and apart. It conveys being aware that all the parts are moving apart, like a map that is shifting at the same time as we are walking. It's like being aware of being alive in body, mind, and spirit, thinking, walking, loving, while at the same time understanding that everybody else is alive too, coming into aliveness with each other. A confusing perspective, easier said than done. And again, Kelly's line, purify the distances into their absolute apart. This is an ekphrasis in which the distance between the collaborators, the artist and the poet, is the depth. And as Michael said, I love that line, a parataxis of content that collapses social hierarchies, hierarchical distinctions between persons. I've heard that actually in a few people's pieces, that idea of collapsing other. So returning to a page in the Garden of Distances, there's this line. Now it happens that we are across the world from ourselves, and the ocean between is made up entirely of streets. Streets, threads, oceans, maps. In Kelly's work, elaborate networks of minds and bodies travel along these circuitry, desiring connection in all possible worlds, the geography of many minds, finding that communion, fellowship, mutual participation, sharing, sometimes, sometimes not, but the quest for this is a lifetime of work, both the one that is conscious and the one that most of the time isn't. Dreaming, consciousness while sleeping, continues this work. Kelly has the fantastic notion, Robert has the fantastic notion, and I know that he'll humbly say that it's not his idea, that the dream remains the voice of the other speaking to the self. And if the dream is speaking amongst others, we may as well invite them into the audience. But what exactly is the dream? It used to be assumed by scientists that dreams only happen during deep paralysis, REM sleep. But they've recently realized that all their hoopla about REM sleep as being the only time during sleep when dreams happen is overstated, and that we actually dream all the time. Duh! You know, anybody who's an artist or a poet, a novelist, we already knew that. But interestingly enough, they figured this out, and I kind of love this. They figured it out because somebody decided to change the question that they asked people when they were coming out of the REM sleep. They used to say, "Have you been dreaming?" Which led people to determine whether they had in fact been dreaming based on their previous assumptions about what a dream is. But when instead they asked people what was passing through your mind just before you woke up, a more nuanced picture emerges, one in which people report vivid hallucinations that are shorter, more static, and more thought-like than the dreams that occur during REM sleep. Now here's a pretty terrific quote from one of the scientists who describes these non-REM sleep dreams. He writes, "Typically more like snapshots than narratives and do not include a self." So I wonder if Kelly's notion of dreams, that the dream is the language of the self to the other, can include these in-between REM vision states in which things are even more ungraspable than deep dream states, but impressionistic all at the same time. And if so, then the great mapping of hypnogeography can happen in social situations that don't involve cold-out sleeping. And as a hypnotherapist, I'm actually going to run a social hypnosis experiment in an art gallery where I'm going to test this theory. But I don't have to talk about that now. But getting back to the poetry, what I'd like to say, or where I'm being led as I follow this thread through Robert's work and thought, is that a long poem such as Garden of Distances is hypnogeography, because the encounter with language and thought, vision and imagination, memory and hallucination crosses through it like buttressed tree roots that intertwine with roots from other trees and create an intricate locus of mind-place. There's been a lot of wonderful metaphors coming forward in this morning, because metaphor, like anecdotes, which I know Robert loves, remains really the best way to communicate. To follow that interrooted passage is to, as Robert writes, reach of me in you, a reach of you in everything. And so I wonder, when it is said, as it has been said for a long time now and is going to be said even more frequently, that what will save the planet's environmental purging and total ecosystem disruption, both in our bodies, minds, and in our land air, when it's said that a shift in human consciousness is occurring even as you sit here in this room, that employs celestial triggers such as supernovas and Earth's alignment with the galactic center in the years leading up to 2012 to trigger the evolution of our species, well, I think about Robert Kelly. Because if the future means coming into more unified passages of consciousness amongst each other, wherever and however we surface and fall, knowing that poetry is what no one knows is good basic training. Because this thing they call shift is what no one knows, and that's an indestructible knowledge. And when whatever it is comes around, it will be in place and it will be in time. And reading Kelly's work means we've all been there before. So I'd like to mark this event as one among many, again to quote Ives, he's very quotable, movement towards our intentional consciousness. So thank you, Robert.